Right, okay, so we're going to have a quick little tutorial about setting up your document in Photoshop and importing images into its various simple selection tools. I'll teach you the basics about selecting images so you can transfer them over to your document side. So first of all, we need to set up our document. So if you go File, New, where it says Preset here, choose International Paper. And you'll see A sizes here, but it only goes up to A3. So we're going to have to just double one side to make it A2. So the shorter side, if you double it, you go the next size up on an A thing. So in this case, twice 297 is 594. If you work in the industry long enough, you just learn these numbers off by heart. So you'll see we've got 594 millimeters wide, 420 high, that's A2 landscape. Resolution here, 300 pixels per inch. Again, often known as DPI. That is the printer resolution. So what we see on the screen is made up of pixels, and we can zoom in and then see them. When those pixels are printed, you'll get the equivalent of 300 in every inch of paper. So if it's set up that big, it'll be a nice big size. You can see here it reckons it might be up to 100 megabytes in, well, at least memory. But it could be more if you have more layers. So okay, that. You'll notice also we've got RGB written up here. Now, without going into this in too much detail, a brief little overview of it. Basically, RGB is the color information in every pixel. So in this case, it's looking at red, green and blue values. You can see here, you can make pretty much any color out of a combination of 0 to 255 on this scale. So 0, 0, 0 is black, 255, 255, 255 is white, and so on. In Illustrator, by default, it's cyan, magenta, yellow and black, and it's a replication of what it would look like from a printer, because printers don't print in red, green and blue, they print in cyan, magenta, yellow and black. If you want to look it up online, there's a whole load of science as to how those colours create black, theoretically, although we add black as well to make it jet black. But the screen works in red, green and blue, so if you work in cyan, magenta, yellow and black, it will just create the nearest equivalent of what it might look like on a printer, which means it's not quite as vivid in colours. So just be aware of that if you ever convert from one to the other. If you've converted a red, green, blue file into a CMYK file, often it comes out a little bit more muted, not quite as vivid, because it's just replicating what a printer would do. So we're going to work in RGB, that's absolutely fine. But like I say, just bear in mind when you print it out, it might be a little less vivid. So if you converted it to CMYK, you'd see that loss of vividness. Right, so this is our blank space. A really quick little overview of Photoshop. We've got this tool palette. All of these palettes here, they're all movable. You can just drag them and hold them. You can even separate out individual ones like that. If you want to get rid of them, that's fine. You can press the little X button like that. Have more space on the screen. To get them back at any time, just go to Window, and you've got all of them there. Now, you've got dual monitors, so you can actually move them over to the other side, keep them out of the way, but sometimes it's quite nice just to kind of just have the ones you need. But Tools, which is that one there, so it's the main one, along the side, it's almost vital to have that out because it's got all of your tool presets. So first of all, we're just going to find some images to transfer over onto our poster. So we're just going to get a few examples of Simeon's SolidWorks tutorial knife. So let's have, I can't remember what these look like, but let's just open them up and see. Okay, so we've got a knife on a white background. Now I want to be able to lift that knife over into our poster there. Now that's pretty much the easiest thing ever. So if I select this one and hold it down, you've got the options. Now by default it's probably set on rectangular anyway, so we'll go on to that one, drag a box, edit copy, go over onto that one, edit, paste. Now that is, in its simplest form, the simplest way of copying an image over onto another image. The trouble, we've got this background here. Now you can see the rendering hasn't made it pure white. So it's almost pure white up here. You can't see the transition from this image to the background. But you can notice it here where it's not quite pure white. Now, if you bring up the layers here, window layers, you might have it open already. Let's get it up here. You can see this is the hierarchy of images in the actual document. So the background here, layer 1, this knife is on top. Now that little eye symbol turns it on and off, so you can hide it if you want to keep the background nice and simple and work on the background. Notice how it's selected like that. So if I draw now, choose a colour, so use the brush tool and just choose any old colour here, like that. You'll notice I've drawn it on the background. I put that knife in front of it, and you can see it's selected. When I've lifted it from the other document, I've lifted all the background as well. Now that might not be what you want. In this case it's not what I want, so I'm going to just get rid of that again. So if I drag the whole layer to that little dustbin, that's one way of deleting an image. Otherwise, if I undo that, you could go delete layer there. That's one way of doing it. Or if you wanted to keep that layer for some reason but just get rid of the image in it, again I use that rectangular marquee and press the delete button. There, the knife has gone but the layer's still there. Now you might want to, for some reason, keep a layer for drawing or writing, or just demonstrate now. You know, if I drew another colour on this layer, you can see they're now separate, so I can still move that around against the background. But if I were to draw that brown line on the background like that, they are merged together, so I cannot separate that brown from the orange. That is now blended together there. It means if I smudge it, for example, you'll notice, by the way, here I'm pressing the square bracket tool to make the palette size, sorry, the brush size bigger. You can see it gets quite big there. I can blur this, smudge it. Now, in this case, it's actually going really slowly. Normally that's quite an instantaneous thing, but being such a big A3 size document and we're screen recording and it's a slow computer, it's struggling to remember all of that, but it's actually kind of smudging that line around a bit. If I make it smaller, it'll be less information to process. It should go a bit quicker, you'll notice it. There we go. Smudging that one layer. Now if I were to try and do that with that line that I did here, I'm only smudging the orange here because I'm on the background layer here. If I were to smudge the brown line in front, I've got to select that layer. So just bear in mind, you can, and I'll show you in a minute how to merge layers together so that you can edit everything in one go, but you can only edit on the layer you're at, so that's something to bear in mind. So I'm going to just delete that layer again, go back to the knife again. We'll keep that nonsense background in the background. So there's loads of different ways of selecting. So we've got the square marquee, the rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee for drawing around, and then single row if you just want to kind of neatly trim close edges. And then underneath it we've got a whole load of other different marquees or tools for creating the same kind of highlighted selection. Now again, if you hold down any of these keys, the ones with the little arrows in front, little corner arrows like that, you get a load of different options. Now in this case we've got lasso tool, polygonal lasso, magnetic. Now the lasso tool, to be honest, it does the same as the polygonal lasso, you just need to press out when you hold it down. So without pressing out, I just hold it down freehand and I can draw a selection like that. So if I copy and paste, you imagine that will come over with that background in that shape. Now instead of doing that, if I click and hold that, so if I hold down out and then just click, it actually does exactly the same as what that other tool, the polygonal lasso, does. So you can actually do both. Now in the case of this, I'm not going right up to the knife because I don't want to lose that blue or kind of crop it accidentally. But I can cut something out like this and then let go at the end. Just goes to the edge. I've just about nearly missed it. Now in that case, it's not the end of the world if you get it wrong, because you can actually add to that selection. Go back to this tool. You need to press the shift button. You see a little plus icon, which means you're adding to that selection. So then I can hold down Alt as well and just carry on adding to it. It'll create more selection. Or if I hold down Alt before I click, I get a negative symbol, which means this is actually quite hard to do it because you've got to press Alt twice. So it knows it's negative, and then you click the mouse, and then you press Alt again, hold it down, and then you can have that polygonal lasso again. Takes a bit of getting used to, but it's quite handy. So you could go around and be a bit more precise. In that case, I can't be there. So I've just cut that edge off. So you can be a little bit more accurate with selecting that way. And you're probably thinking, I'm sure I've seen, those of you who might have played around with Photoshop before, if you go edit, select, deselect like that. By the way, when you get good at Photoshop, you'll notice all of these shortcuts here. They're written here, and it makes it a lot quicker. If you want to deselect something, it's just Control D, get rid of it like that. Another way of selecting, which is much quicker, underneath it here is Quick Selection tool, and again you've got some options. Now I'm a bit old school, and they always only used to call it Magic Wand tool in the old versions of Photoshop. And Quick Selection tool is a kind of combination of being able to paint on selections. You have a little play with it, but we're going to use Magic Wand because, like I say, I'm old school. Click on the white, ping. You can see it's just automatically highlighted all of the outline of the knife. Now if I zoom out, you'll notice it's actually selected the whole thing and this outline. So if you imagine, this is actually what's selected. So if I go copy and paste, again shortcut Control C, that's a standard shortcut on all Windows programs, or Apple C in the case of a Mac. So Control C copies that, I put it into here, Control V, I've just got the outline there because it's selected the white. Now that's not what I want there, so get rid of that. What we want is the knife, so we need to invert that selection. So if you go select inverse, again shift Control I, which is a quick way of doing it, but it makes it opposite. So now we've just got the opposite selected, which is the knife. So I'll copy that, go onto there, hey presto, instant cutout. Now obviously that's really quick and easy. There's a little, if you want to be really pernickety, and I would recommend it if you're going to do really good quality images. This knife was on a white background, so it means you've just got a subtle bit of nearly white on the edges, where it's kind of softened the edges. It hasn't selected the light greys and the light blues and the soft, what we call anti-aliased pixels, which have got the soft edges. It can't be that accurate in knowing where those soft edges are, and that's more noticeable when you've got a low resolution. If you've got a pixely image, you'll notice where it's just selected that color range, in this case the white. Now there's a number of ways around that as well. If you want to be really pernickety, you're probably thinking, well, that's fine, you know, I'm just going to drop that image in, and it possibly will be. Certainly if you're using a light background, you're not really going to notice that much, but there's a number of things you can do to help that. First of all, possibly the easiest method, is you can what we call feather the selection. So rather than having it completely selected or deselected, it just gives it a kind of subtle fade out on the edge. So if you go select, modify feather like that, and it says how big a radius that feather is. So if you imagine either side of this line, a feather of 5 pixels would be 2 pixels fading to nothing on either side. So in this case, that might be a bit soft. You'll notice a soft edge, but I'll demonstrate that if I OK that and then copy it, paste it into here. It's gone straight over the top of it. So I just move it, and then you can see the difference between the two. If I zoom right in there, can you see? We've got a kind of fade out to this white, so it's actually still picking up a bit of a white information on this dark colour. It's not ideal, but it can sometimes help if you've got a really pixely blocky image and you see the hard pixels because it's only selected or not selected with that magic wand tool. Takes a bit of playing around, but there you go. So there's that method. Use this different knife as well. You've also got magnetic lasso tool, which is a little bit like the magic wand tool, so it kind of guesses where you mean. This time we just freehand around it, and it will kind of lock to where it sees a sudden change in pixels. So I'm not being that accurate trailing the edge around here, but you can see it's actually managed to do it pretty well. So I'm gonna, can you see I kind of might deviate off it a bit, and it kind of, oh, it thinks, yeah, I want it to have that space. But generally, where you've got an image where it's pretty obvious where the outline is, this works quite well. And then if you hit enter just to finish, it'll cut it, just finish it for you. So Control C to copy that over, Control V, paste that over like that. So there's that method. Or the most versatile method, and it's a combination of all these methods. Like I say, you might use that and then decide to trim off that white bit. We'll use the lasso tool. So remember, Alt minus is it, click, and then Alt again, just so I can keep it polygonal, drawing polygons. Oh, come on, there we go. So I'm just going to chop that off manually. So you can use a combination of different tools. Now these knives are pretty sharp, hard-edged, things like that, but let's say where was it? I think it's in my downloads still, actually. Yeah, Clint Eastwood, there you go. Right, so I'm going to cut Clint out. Now as you can see, if I use the magic wand tool, it does actually do a fairly good job of cutting out that white. But where it's got fuzzy edges, it's not so good. Now remember, we've just selected that white bit. So, common to all the keyboard presses, if you press Alt, you subtract something. If you press Shift, you add to it. So if I want to add to this selection, hold down Shift and you've got a little plus button. So can you see how it's not quite managed to get all of this grey? It doesn't know where to cut off, where to stop selecting. Now you can change that there where it says tolerance. So just undo that. Again, you've got history, which is like a load of undos. So if you want to go back a couple, I'm just going to go back one here. If I change that tolerance to say 2, it really is quite subtle with it. It only goes a couple of RGB pixel numbers different, so it only selects very, very similar colours. If I selected 99, it pretty much gets all of it. It still doesn't select everything, even at the maximum. So as you can see, it's selected a little bit too much of his hair. If we go invert selection, so select inverse, Shift Control I, we've now just got his face. Now if I copied him, put him onto here, you'll see that hair is pretty messy. It's not ideal. You can see the kind of hard edge as well where it's selected it. We want a fuzzy air. So that's no good. But you know, we've got the basics. We've got his face selected. We've got a bit too much of his shirt, and this is not very good. Now, one other really good selection. If you're ever editing something that is a bit fuzzy and it's got quite a lot of variety, and it's quite hard to use these automatic tools or Polygon doing it manually because it's too hard edged, then you can go into this one here, which is Quick Mask. You click that, and the selected bit stays clear, and the masked bit, which is almost the bit where we haven't got selected, but it's the bit we're not editing, goes this kind of faint red. Now then you can use ordinary tools. You're not painting on the image anymore, you're just painting the mask. If any of you do graphics and you've still seen the silk screen, imagine this is the blue bit that we're masking off. So I can delete it off using the eraser. That's the eraser button. So I can scrub that all out. Remember, square brackets on all the tools make them bigger or smaller. It's going to be quite hard to... Oops, sorry, wrong way. So, eraser there. So we just want to get that back. Now that ear, because it's kind of blurred, it's a very, very blurred image. You might want to draw it in, or even blur it yourself using, hold down the smudge button, you've got blur tool there. So you can actually blur the mask. Now that's not a great example, but that's slightly better, but you can see the strength up here, make it really strong, because it's quite a subtle tool, the blur tool. So you can, or you could smudge it as well. So you can really kind of play around with the selection. Using the quick mask, you can be really accurate with getting the selection right. Now I'm not going to bubble with Clint, spend forever, but I'm just demonstrating the tools. But it might be quite good, you know, to have a little play with the blur tool on his hair. So if I make that tool tiny and turn the strength of the blur right up, 100% I wouldn't go 100 because it won't ever fade out. If you have it close to 100 though, eventually it will fade out like hair. Now this is where a graphics tablet comes into its own, because you can just sketch in things like that. You are going to be probably taking a lot of renderings from SolidWorks, and they're going to be quite accurate, and you're not going to be dealing with this, but it's quite handy to know. It's just one of the tools that's available to you in Photoshop. So when you're finished with that mask, you can go edit in standard mode, and you see, remember the mask bit in red is the bit we're not selecting, so we've still only got Clint here. Now really I would have wanted to do a proper job of this. I would have wanted to really blur that edge there, because it's got an overly exaggerated out of focus depth of field, they call it. But yeah, you want to really get in there, and you can actually, in this case, you can select parts of a selection. So we're in this kind of edit mask mode. I can now select that bit and go filter, blur, put loads of blur on it if I want. Now it only shows the black and white preview here of a kind of mask, but you can see you can just go crazy with the amount of blur. It's a bit quicker than using that blur tool. So you've just got that one bit of selection, it's blurred that loads. Okay, so edit, exit quick mask, and then if you copy and paste that over, like I say, I mean it still needs a bit more work, but you can see those bits have come over quite nicely, like that. I'm doing a pretty mad poster here. So other forms of selection, what you can do, you can actually select, if you go color range here, you can try, again it might not work on this rather blurry, out of focus, and multicoloured image here of Clint. But if I were to select the background, I can actually change the sensitivity, a bit like the tolerance, where you've got the selection tolerance on the thing. You can see if I adjust it up too much, it starts selecting him though, his skin tones as well, which isn't quite ideal. But going back to, I don't know, let's say if we wanted to lift that logo Irwin, it's the only thing in that yellow colour. So if he goes, obviously you could try doing it like this, it does actually work. But if you've got a load of complicated bits and you only want the yellow bits, then go select colour range. Now you just select the yellow of Irwin. You can see if I zoom it right out, it starts picking up a little bit of a grey, because there's a tiny bit of yellow in that. But in the case of this, just go as high as it goes before you start getting the other bits, so about there. And then copy that. There you go. On his moustache, let's have an Irwin moustache. So that's pretty much all the methods of selecting an image. I mean, to be honest, there's many different ways of doing the same thing in Photoshop, you'll find. But that's just a little overview of how you can select your imagery. Now, when it comes to rendering your CAD images, if you're going to be putting them together into a poster, it's probably a good idea to consider what background colour it's going to go on. Because like I say, you know, where it fades to white here, that pixel information goes from dark blue and it has gradients up to white. Now if I want to put this on a black background, you'd see this hard edge. So in SolidWorks, just bear that in mind, what colour you want to end up having the image on if you're going to lift it out. So that in a nutshell is selection and how to bring images into your document. So once you've got these images in, you'll notice they each come in on separate layers, and I had a little overview of layers earlier. So it's a little bit annoying at first. If you get carried away bringing them all in, you've got these little tiny thumbnails, which you can change the size of in options, but obviously the bigger the thumbnails, the longer the list is, and you've got to scroll up and down. Now, this is all in order of what I brought it in. But obviously if I wanted to have that behind Clint, in that case, the Irwin, I'll flip it around so it's underneath Clint. Now, it might be a good idea, you might find it a good idea just to label things. So just double click on the text bit where it says layer 5. Double click on it and you'll be able to change it. If you double click here, you get layer styles, which is something else I'll go into. Now some of you might want to put a drop shadow, you know, you bring in an image. I don't really like the basic drop shadow, where you've got exactly the same outline that's just tinted in grey. It's a little bit tacky, but you know, that's personal choice when it comes to graphic design and editing. But you do have features within this layer. So this knife, for example, on its own, there's various things we can do. Let's bring it to the top. So we're going to just bring it onto the top like that, and I'll just demonstrate. First of all, we've got opacity here, which means obviously how opaque or transparent it is. So you can fade it out right down to kind of barely noticeable, or 0 in fact. You've also got here, you've got excuse me, you've got different layer effects. So the standard is normal, obviously. Now if you notice, when I fade that away, it just fades out. But if I had dissolve on, for example, it's a bit tacky. You can actually just fade it out by just having pixel dissolve on it, which is I don't think I've ever used that, but it's there anyway. Other things, so instead of being an opaque image, it can consider what information's underneath it as well. So for example, darken, it's still looking behind the image, so the bits that are added together become a little bit darker. That's also the same effect but much stronger in multiply. So in fact, going back to the beginning, right, we've got a basic selection with a white background, or more or less white. Copy that, paste that in. Now if I put that on multiply, imagine this was actually quite a complicated thing to cut out, like I was demonstrating all the different things, the operations you can use to cut things out. If you just wanted it near the edge, if you just wanted it near the edge like that, I haven't cut that out, but in multiply, the white isn't actually making any difference to the layers underneath. It's only the black that is completely opaque. So it means you don't even have to worry about cutting things out like that. And you'll notice just where it's orange, it does actually tint the knife. So it's not really that suitable for you know, just a direct replacement to cutting things out. If you want that knife to be opaque, for example, you still have to cut it out. But it's just something to bear in mind. The opposite to that is screen. So instead of the white being invisible and the black being completely opaque, the other way around is screen. So the white is now completely opaque and the black bits are invisible. Now this is where it begins to get quite nice for creating textures, for example. So let's just get rid of all of this. You can either do that, or you can select shift and select all of those and then drag them down like that. So we've just got that background. I'm going to get a textured background, so oops, wrong ones. So aluminium honeycomb. It's an interesting texture, it's a bit like the bed of a laser cutter. I'm just going to copy that. So another shortcut, Control A, select all. I've now got too many things open, just get rid of a few of them. So let's paste that in. As you can see, you know, on the screen it was quite a big image, but when it comes into this big A2 image here, it's pretty small. Now if I go edit, transform, scale, like that, I can make it bigger. Now here, I'm actually scaling from the middle, and it's locked XY aspect ratio, so I'm not stretching it or squishing it. I'm doing that by pressing down, holding down Shift and Alt together. If I let go of them both, it stretches from the bottom right, the opposite side to where I'm dragging, which is quite good if you're fitting something into, you know, a left top, aligning something up with left, top left, or right, etc., etc. If you hold down Shift, you lock the aspect ratio. If you hold down Alt, it scales from the middle. Hold down both, it does that both like that. So we can just zoom it up like that, and then double click on it. It's created a load of new pixels, because when that blew up, you know, there was loads and loads of pixel information that has been created. You can just about see the old pixels there. So don't be aware, you don't really want to blow things up too much, because they do get a bit fuzzy like that. But if you're using an image like this as a background image, it doesn't matter so much, as long as you keep it blurry and faint. You know, if I made that really, really faint like that, see, it's become an interesting texture. So I'm going to hide that layer and get rid of all that nonsense underneath it. So I'm going to just fill it with foreground colour white. Now be aware, by default, I don't know why, but this new version of Photoshop, if you ever want to fill, it's got this thing called ContentAware by default, which doesn't really do anything that you want it to. It's probably very useful, but I don't know what it is yet. Foreground colour is just the colour you've got down there. So in this case, we're going to have this yucky green, which I don't want. I just want the background colour, so I'm just going to go like that, and it's filled it in with the background colour here. So I'm going to use this tool here, the gradient tool. So I just filled with a paint bucket or edit fill, like that. If you hold down that, you get a gradient tool. Now in this case it goes from foreground to background colour. So let's change the background colour to, I don't know, like a royal blue or something like that. So we've got this yucky green to royal blue. I drag a line like this and it creates a gradient. Now from a graphic design point of view, that looks pretty horrible, and you'll notice those posters on the wall, they do have slightly more appealing colour gradients, but they are, you know, a straightforward gradient's a little bit kind of basic. You can, you know, there's more potential for you to do something nice. So for example, to use that honeycomb texture with that gradient colour, we use multiply. All the dark areas come out and all the white areas leave the gradient underneath. But you can play around with all these different filters if you want, and you know, if they're too full on, you can just bring down the opacity of it, for example. That's just one example of what you can do. I quite like the screen where it kind of adds colour to things. So you know, you can just really muck around at this stage with all manner of combinations of layer effects, and there's loads of really kind of, you know, quite trippy ones, hard light, soft light down the bottom. So you can really muck around with the layer effects. Oh, that one's quite nice. You know, a lot of the time it's just experimentation. Now, I don't know what poster we're promoting here. It's some kind of chemical bees by the look of it. You know, Bayer. I mean, use pesticides or anything like that. Just, you know, rather than killing bees, we're going to make robot mutant bees or something. I don't know. So we've got this combination here. Now, I quite like that. I'm going to just merge that into one. So I've got the background and the layer one. I want to be able to create one layer out of that. So I select them both, or rather just have both visible. So for example, if I had a new layer, just go new layer like that, and I've got something else on the top, like, you know, like that. This is separate to the other bits. I want to merge these two, so I turn that one off, I select that one, and then I go, in fact I don't even know where the menu is for. I always use Control Shift E, but I think you can get to it from here as well, and it's merge visible. There it is. So that merges those two to one. Now I can edit that, you know, I can smudge it or whatever in this case. And again, you can see how the pink works, you know, by mucking around with it. Now bear in mind, this tutorial is all about showing the features. It's your challenge to be able to use them aesthetically, and generally in design you've got to bear in mind less is more. So I don't want to see you using every single feature that I've shown you. This is just a quick overview of the various things you can do. So let's go back to getting a knife. That's a bad example. Let's have a whole knife. No, wrong one. Okay, so I'm just going to go like that, and then Control Shift I to inverse, copy it, bring it in. So I'm going to scale that up. Can you see how those pixels are now a little bit visible? Because that was quite a small image, and we scale it up, it doesn't look very good. I don't want to see images like that. If you've got a bad quality image from SolidWorks and you want to blow it up, just consider re-rendering at a higher resolution so you don't have this nasty pixel. But earlier on I was gonna show you drop shadow. It's an automatic preset on here. There's another thing, you've got a layer style here, blending options. We've got these different ones here. So drop shadow is down bottom. You can see it's put on a little, you can only just notice it really. Hang on. You get more options if you go drop shadow there, like that. So it's the angle at which it's the shadows underneath it. So just increase all of this and you can see you've got various features to play around with it. Now, like I said earlier, you can use it subtly, but sometimes it can be a bit tacky in graphic design. But that's just an example of what you can do. You've got glows. I mean, for example, outer glow. If you're wanting to highlight something on a black background, it might be quite useful. You can hide your pixel edges if you've rendered it on a light background, for example. So that's set to screen. All sorts of different things you can play around. I mean, it's all about just playing. Generally, Photoshop's all about just playing around and seeing what the various things do. Couple more things to point out. Now, I'm just going to get rid of that history. Just going to get rid of that outer glow. Now, bear in mind, I'm selected on the knife layer in this pink paint, and I draw on that layer, and you can see that I've drawn on top of that knife. Now that's all editable. Obviously that's probably not what I want. This button here is lock transparent pixels. So if I click that, now look what happens. I only draw on the knife. So if you've cut something out and you want to just kind of clean it up with a brush, that's quite useful. So I don't know what might that be useful for. Well, let's say if we wanted to kind of just accentuate a little highlight on the top, like that. You know, you can really use the tools in Photoshop quite manually, and if you're good at drawing, you know, you can replicate sketching and drawing quite well just by using the paintbrush. So for example, that highlight is only on the knife at that point, but if I turn off a lock transparency like that and then draw on it, you can create a flare, a little highlight like that. So yeah, there's loads. I mean, I could spend all day just going through the features on this, but that's the beginning. Hopefully it'll give you enough ammunition to be able to make a start with a poster, and I'll come round and see how you're getting on with the beginnings, and maybe if there's a particular feature you want to try and do on the poster, work a way around it. It's all sorts of things that you can do in Photoshop. But yeah, best thing to do is have a little play. Try all these things. You know, tons and tons of really nice little tools, like the pattern stamp, for example. If you hold down out like that, you can draw other parts on it like that. You're cool. It's your design anyway. Hope that's been useful, and I'll catch up with a more advanced tutorial on certain things when I think of what to do. Alright, thank you very much.